How does your coalition operate in this more hostile domestic environment?
We have an opportunity right now to shut this down in real time within a week or two. There is a mechanism for shutting down the genocide right now.
It's called Uniting for Peace. It allows the UN General Assembly to act when the Security Council is paralysed by vetoes.
In the 1950s, it was used in order to send a protection force into Egypt, put tens of thousands of troops into this, who would be there as a force for peace, not a force for war. President Petro of Colombia urging him to move forward, not to wait any longer, to put this into the light of day. There are already countries who have stepped forward to say that they would put tens of thousands of troops into this. Global public opinion is there. There is no way out for Israel. Israel is really unraveling. The biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. All we can do is protest. All we can do is resist, as opposed to demanding a really fundamental and transformative solution. Here we are, giving $30 billion to Israel in order to murder children by the tens of thousands, while we can't even provide food assistance for starving children here in this country. They have free health care, while 100 million Americans are struggling with health care debt.
Is there any realistic prospect of shifting either of the major parties' position?
For the first time in the US, where more people support Palestinians than support Israel. This union of social movements that's happening to stop the genocide now, which has been brought together really by the leadership of the Palestinian civil society and Pingo, and the social movements of Latin America, the ALBA movement, the Hague group. We're unstoppable together. It's always impossible until it was inevitable. We have the power to do this. It's just a question of having the courage of our convictions.
This should be the new slogan of every rally on Palestine all over the world. We should all unite under one banner and unite for peace.
Go to Lifeline for Palestine.
Welcome to the next installment of the Real Talk podcast. Thank you again for everyone who is following and supporting me and my team, and enabling us to continue to provide you interviews with experts, activists, and defenders of the truth in order to keep us awakened and aware of the propaganda that tries to manipulate and mislead us. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. And if you can afford $5 a month, please support our mission by signing up to the Buy Me a Coffee link that is in the captions below. Today, I'm very excited to be interviewing Dr. Jill Stein, who is a 3-time US presidential candidate and someone who is leading an initiative that is trying to circumvent the paralysis we are witnessing in the United Nations Security Council of America's continued vetoing of any resolution that could end the genocide in Gaza and bring those responsible to justice. But before I introduce Dr. Jill Stein, let me start by giving you context, just in case you haven't been keeping up with the news of the last 2 weeks, and to provide a foundation for the discussion we're about to get into. On September 29th, 2025, President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu announced what they called a peace plan for Gaza. Let's be clear about what it actually is: a colonial framework that puts Trump as chair of a board of peace, includes Tony Blair in governance, indefinitely defers Palestinian statehood, and requires Gaza's complete demilitarization while Israeli forces remain in Rafah. It gets worse. Trump met with 8 nations at the UN, on the sidelines of the UN, prior to the peace plan being announced. He met with Turkey, Qatar, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Pakistan, the United Arab Emirates, and Jordan, and got them to agree to a framework. But the version announced a couple of days later in Washington was substantially different. Arab officials admitted later that this was not what they had agreed on, and this was the Netanyahu plan. Netanyahu secured last-minute changes on nearly everything, and admittedly, after announcing a plan supposedly designed to negotiate Palestinian statehood, Netanyahu does what Netanyahu does and publicly declared that there will never be a Palestinian state. It was a bait and switch, and those 8 nations, the same ones who gave passionate speeches condemning genocide at the UN, quietly welcomed it anyway. The ceasefire that came into effect on October the 10th was really quite astounding, because even to the last minute, Israel continued bombing Gaza up until about 5:55 a.m. of the morning that the ceasefire was to come into effect. And it killed more than 27 people, and supposedly was the mark of what's to come. Netanyahu announced Israel could resume the war anytime it wanted. And this is the 3rd ceasefire Israel has signed with Hamas and violated. Whilst the 3rd one hasn't yet been violated, looking at history and looking at the ceasefire with Hezbollah, we have a precedent of what we can expect. Since October 7th, just for historical reference, since October 7th, 2023, over 67,000 Palestinians, according to the Hamas health officials, have been killed. But we know that through more recent intelligence and medical studies that possibly up to 500,000 people have been killed. And the vast majority, civilians and children. Entire neighbourhoods reduced to rubble, hospitals destroyed, and a UN-confirmed famine deliberately engineered through siege and starvation. Multiple UN bodies, international legal experts, and human rights organisations have concluded what many around the world already are saying, and we all know, that this is unquestionably a genocide, and it continues. For 2 years, the UN Security Council has tried and failed to stop the killing, and the United States has vetoed at least 6 ceasefire resolutions, providing Israel with both diplomatic cover and billions, more than $30 billion in military and other aid. Trump's peace plan didn't solve this problem. It proved the US can simply bypass the UN entirely with bilateral deals backed by military and economic power. But 3 weeks before Trump announced his plan, something else happened. On September the 6th, 2025, our guest today, Jill Stein, launched the Lifeline for Palestine coalition, calling for an entirely different approach, one that doesn't rely on American permission. It's called Uniting for Peace, a mechanism created, ironically, by the United States itself during the Korean War that allows the UN General Assembly to act when the Security Council is paralysed by vetoes. It's been invoked only 11 times in the last 75 years. It could authorise sanctions, deploy peacekeeping forces, and apply the same international pressure that helped end apartheid in South Africa. At the September United Nations General Assembly, world leaders delivered some of the most forceful condemnations of Israel we've ever heard. Colombia's president called for international military intervention. Indonesia offered 20,000 peacekeeping troops. Turkey's president held up photos of starving children, and diplomats walked out during Netanyahu's speech. And then they folded. The same nations that condemned genocide legitimised Trump's framework before even seeing the final version. So here's what makes this conversation with Jill Stein today so urgent. Trump hasn't just proven the US can sideline the UN whenever it wants with bilateral deals backed by raw power. Arab nations that spoke forcefully about genocide capitulated within weeks, within days, in fact. Israel violates every ceasefire it signs. The question isn't whether uniting peace is a good idea in theory. It's whether any real international legal mechanism can matter when American military and economic power simply overrides it. Can the UN General Assembly succeed where passionate speeches have failed? Is there any pathway through international law when Trump has just demonstrated that the US writes its own rules? And what does it mean to pursue this strategy at the exact moment American democracy itself appears to be sliding toward authoritarianism? Sorry for that long introduction, but now I introduce Dr. Jill Stein, who is a physician, environmental activist, three-time Green Party presidential candidate, and the leader of an international coalition trying to do something that hasn't been seriously attempted in decades: use the UN General Assembly to stop the genocide over American objections. Welcome, Dr. Stein.
Thank you, Daisy. It's an honor to be here. And that was really a beautiful summary of the state of our crisis right now.
Thank you. Well, to start, obviously going straight into it, we watched and we've just seen Trump and Netanyahu sideline the UN entirely and Arab nations fold. Let's start, though, with what exactly is Uniting for Peace, and why should anyone believe it can work when we've just seen American power override international law so completely?
Great. And before I jump into explaining, I just want to clarify two things. One is that Uniting for Peace has been a movement that's been building, actually. This has been building for years. And as of a little over a year ago, the United Nations passed, the General Assembly, that is, passed a resolution saying that that Israel would have 1 year to comply with the International Court of Justice. And this is by way of explaining what's going on with Uniting for Peace as well. But to make the point that the people of the world are convinced they don't need any more death and destruction to know that Israel is essentially a terrorist state and is operating not only outside the law, but really against the law and against human rights and basic human decency. So while the governments of some countries have betrayed the prospects for peace, they've also betrayed their people, and they've betrayed the people of the world. And therein, I think, lies enormous hope and power that it's not a done deal. There is no stopping the resistance to Israel. And that's both in the region, that's in Palestine, and it's really world over right now. So the actual realities of power are very different from the enforcement that the US empire is trying to bring to its agenda and Israel's agenda. So while the road ahead is very difficult, it is not by any means impossible. And I think there's reason to say that there is no way to stop the uprising of humanity right now against this genocide. So a few more words about Uniting for Peace, and to clarify that there have been many organizations that have been promoting this. And we founded Lifeline for Palestine in September, when we became aware of the realities of Uniting for Peace, that it was and is a real concrete opportunity and mechanism and series of circumstances that have aligned to make an end to genocide possible, not just in the future, but right now. There is a mechanism for shutting down the genocide right now. And we were so uplifted and inspired by the work that these many communities have been doing that we wanted to help lift it up, especially in the US, where the prospects of peace and stopping genocide are completely, they are buried, and the media is quite collaborating in the talking points of empire and all that. So we got going in September in order to help lift up the work that many organizations and social movements have been carrying on for quite a while. So Uniting for Peace is a mechanism, as you mentioned, that's been around for decades. It was first used actually, shortly after the founding of the UN. In the 1950s, it was used in order to send a protection force into Egypt, into the Suez, where Israel, Great Britain, and France had sent their troops to basically resist Egypt's effort to nationalize the Suez. And thanks to the global consensus, because it requires 2/3 of all nations voting in the UN. So it really requires a very large global consensus. And that was reached, which shined a lot of daylight on what was going on, making it very difficult for the occupying countries to resist the global consensus. And then there are actual troops on the ground, a protection force that was sent in. And I believe without a single shot being fired, Israel, Great Britain, and the UK were forced to back down and to basically leave Egypt. So this is a concept that has actually been used and has worked. Uniting for Peace, I believe you mentioned also, has been used many times. And this is a process whereby the General Assembly, that is the rank and file, it's like the grassroots democracy within the UN that is not under the stranglehold of US empire and its handful of allies who generally rule the day. So this is outside of their purview. This is a small d democracy of world nations. And it has been used many times to pass resolutions, but it hasn't been used often to actually send in a protection force. And that is what we're calling for right now, because, genocide doesn't end itself. I don't believe it ever has. And, and that is what we're calling for. There are wonderful movements out there, which are all very important and which this particular resolution will also strengthen. That is sanctions, economic sanctions, military embargo, actually stripping Israel, revoking Israel's credentials in the General Assembly, as was done to South Africa during apartheid. So there are many pieces of this which have been proposed in the pending resolution, and they all come together. But what's unique about this is that it actually sends in a protection force for essentially two major reasons, and that is to protect the lives of Palestinians. They are the victims here, and yet what we see in the Trump proposal is essentially a series of protections for Israel. The genocider is being protected. The outlaw is being, the criminal, the warmonger is being protected here, not the human rights and the basic rights of Palestinians. So that's what Uniting for Peace would do in sending in this force. It's to protect Palestinians and specifically to open up the pathways for humanitarian aid, recovery, cleaning up the ordnance and the mess and beginning reconstruction. It actually enables all of that to begin, and it puts boots on the ground, which are there not for the purpose of war, but for the purpose of peace, in line with global opinion and global morality. So it's remarkable that as US empire is doubling down, and you could say that the genocide is the ultimate expression of that empire. Ronald Reagan, in fact, his Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger, referred to Israel as the unsinkable battleship for America in the Middle East, essentially safeguarding the US access to the oil supply and a few other imperial objectives. But that's what this is. This is empire, and it's an empire which is unraveling, as we speak. Economically, militarily, the US has been losing all of its conflicts over the past several decades. This, and not only democracy, but also the economy and just the living conditions of America are also going down with the ship right now. So there are enormous forces arrayed domestically and globally for there to be not only an end to genocide, but a restoration, if you can call it that, or maybe it's for the first time, the actual rule of international law, human rights, and diplomacy, which is what foreign policy should be all about.
Definitely. Okay, so practically though, speaking, the General Assembly votes, 2/3 agree. And you mentioned a series of actions that could be taken, but you need a member state, don't you, to actually put it forward? And it could be Palestine, the Palestinian representatives. Is that right? And why hasn't that happened? If that's, what is that? What is that step? Because my reading of it is it needs to be a member state that puts it forward. And I'm curious why the Palestinians haven't put it forward. But I guess you have to do it when you know you've got support, or there's, the lobbying is on side. But can you give us some insights on that?
Sure. Yes. And in fact, President Petro of Colombia has stated specifically that he will put that resolution forward, that he is working on that resolution, and that diplomatic channels are currently being used right now to build support for it. And one of the purposes of Lifeline for Palestine is not only to inform people that there actually is a mechanism for us to bring about peace here and an end to genocide. There is a mechanism. We, as humanity, around the globe, we have an overwhelming supermajority in favor of ending the genocide peacefully. And that supermajority has already voted. In the vote that took place a little over a year ago, a year on September 18th, the UN said in no uncertain terms that Israel needed to comply with the rulings of the International Court of Justice, basically to end genocide, occupation, settlements, et cetera, and to allow Palestinians to return and to be compensated for the devastation that's been wrought upon them. In other words, that international law needs to be followed, including the ruling of the International Court of Justice. And the UN basically validated that mandate, took it on as its own mandate, and said, Israel, you have 1 year. That vote was not simply a majority. It wasn't just a supermajority. It was actually about 90% of the votes in the UN said as much, that we are holding the line for international law and justice and humanity here. So,
but what's happened with that?
Well,
the year
passed. That year has passed. And I think one of the things going on here is that the US and Israel and their allies have been very busy trying to create the illusion of substitute resolutions. So why do you have suddenly this flurry of resolutions, including the French-Saudi plan? And in particular, there was also the New York resolution, which was essentially validating the French-Saudi plan, which is a so-called stabilization force. What does it stabilize? It stabilizes the status quo, that is the occupation. These are basically competitor resolutions that are attempting to use that space right now, this trigger space, the trigger of 1 year, and then the UN is going to do something. So they're trying to force their resolutions forward. And the Trump so-called peace plan, which is not a plan and it's not about peace, it's really a perpetual occupation colonization plan. That is, the propaganda wheels are really going full speed ahead on that right now, but already there are huge cracks in the wheel, and there have been from the start. So that plan is beginning to fall apart, as we speak, and its shiny new sparkle, is long gone.
But no one's falling for it. I mean, they're trying to distract from that 1 year deadline, but no one's falling for it, especially as you mentioned, the vast majority of member states are, totally against Israel, as evidenced by them walking out at the United Nations when he spoke. I mean, you couldn't have a louder demonstration of their, not even dislike, it's just abhorrence towards him and everything that Israel stands for. So
yes. And the point is, I think that the real key point here is that the public, humanity across the world, despises this genocide. They actually despise Israel and its government as well. And there's no coming back from that. They cannot bury what the world knows now. So the momentum to pass this resolution is, we'll put it this way, It's not huge at the moment because most people don't know about it. The press has refused to cover it. And there's this kind of learned sense of helplessness. So people are dedicated to one piece or another, like we will have an embargo or we will, have a military blockade. But that's not actually going to stop the genocide. And there are lots of ways around embargoes and blockades, weapons blockade. There are ways around that in the complicated world that we live in. So it's really important that we move to uniting for peace for a protection force. And as the world discovers this, there is enormous momentum that is building behind it. And because Petro has committed to proposing it, it's just a matter of time, which is where it comes back to us, what we do as civil society. There's this wonderful saying from Alice Walker, the novelist and poet, and to paraphrase her, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. So this spin machine is all on telling us that we are irrelevant to this process, that the deciders like Tony Blair and Donald Trump and his real estate family and their real estate negotiators have all decided, no, Gaza's prime real estate, we are going to occupy it and sell it and make ourselves more profitable. No, the world is absolutely nauseated and disgusted by that. The world really wants to see, Palestine sovereign and free, because what happens in Palestine doesn't stay in Palestine.
Right.
This is like our entire world order, which is being decided. It's kind of like the last chance for the UN to show that it's relevant, because it certainly hasn't been certainly for the last 2 years, but even before that as well. The UN has been very reluctant to assert itself against its corporate imperial masters. It needs to do that. But at the end of the day, democracy it's not 100% in charge, but it has a lot to do with what happens, especially through this Uniting for Peace process. So this is an opportunity for us to assert civil society pressure on our governments by shining daylight on this, because they all give lip service to Palestinian sovereignty and freedom and the end of genocide. They have put their money down on that in their vote 1 year ago. So now it's time to hold their feet to the fire and demand that they stand strong, that they maintain their support for Palestine, basically to hold the line for Palestine. And that is what we're encouraging people. And I want to send people to our website right now. That is lifelineforpalestine.com. Go to the Take Action page, where we have, for example, a petition to President Petro of Colombia, urging him to move forward, not to wait any longer, to put this into the light of day, because it'll be much easier to advocate for once the actual legislation and the language is on the table. There are letters to the state of Palestine, as you mentioned. Where are they in this process? Unfortunately, they are a very compromised entity, compromised by their funding, compromised by the governance capacities that they have at the really through the favor of the U.S. and Israel. So they're in a very difficult position. They're also going to be completely shut down, essentially, by the Trump plan. They don't have much hope of any future whatsoever. So maybe they will be more in a position to actually take a good hard look at what's happening and align themselves with history and with what's right here. There is a letter, also a sign-on letter, to send to your UN representatives. By shining daylight on this, they need to be shamed or otherwise incentivized to do right for the people of their countries. And we can say that with confidence, because the antipathy, the horror at what Israel represents, what this genocide represents, and increasingly what the United States represents. As Martin Luther King put it, my country is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. Truer now than it was even then. And people are really beginning to see the treachery, not only of the state of Israel, but also the United States, which used, like Israel often does, the U.S. used negotiations as cover in this case with Iran, we used negotiations with Iran in order to basically do a sneak attack. And that is fundamentally, that's Israel's negotiating policy. It's kill the negotiators. It's remarkable that the negotiators are still there, even after the attempts on their lives right now from Hamas. In particular, one of the chief negotiators, I believe his son was actually killed, and I believe his wife was injured. So the US and Israel both play
Dirty.
as dirty as imaginable here. And the world is disgusted, horrified, and we're all paying the price in the sabotaging of our economies, our environment, essentially our future. We do not have a future under the prevailing order and the trajectory that it's on. So all people need right now is to know that there is an alternative. That's why everyone watching this can play such an important role by going to lifelineforpalestine.com, by signing on these various newsletters and petitions, and by signing on for future updates on the next steps.
Thank you, Jill, and we'll put it up on the screen and also put the link in the captions when we post this. So tell me, with President Petro, do you think he's not doing it right now because this peace plan has come into effect and he's waiting to see if anything actually translates into peace, or are people saying to him, "Don't waste it now"? Could that be delaying his action?
I think this was certainly the intent of the Trump peace plan. And we've seen this before with the Biden administration. Shortly after the ICJ rulings, the Biden administration put forward a ceasefire, which obscured things for months. But I think this one is fading much faster. If you look at the commentaries on independent media now, very much from the start, but now it's pretty uniform that people are consider this plan absolutely laughable and a transparent seize for power. So I don't think the lull is going to be long. I know it delayed some of our work. We did not want to ask people for commitments and to sign letters. These are organizational letters. We didn't want them to have to deal with it while there was so much fog. We wanted to let the fog settle a little bit, and it has. And, we're back at it. Again, diplomatic channels are confidential. So I have no idea actually what is taking place through those diplomatic channels, who is signing on, what co-sponsors are waiting in the wings. It would be, I think, common sense to assume that there was a little bit of a delay. But I don't think it's going to last long, to look at just the outrage and the cynicism that continues to prevail. I saw, secondhand reports, so I haven't seen this confirmed yet, but I believe it was, I want to say, the Kuwait Times reporting this morning on a plan that Israel and the collaborating Arab countries have to basically go into Gaza now. Step 2 is to go into Gaza and rip up the tunnels. So this is what was not negotiated. This was like left on the table, is this notion of disarming a people who have a right, an internationally recognized right to resist occupation. So this is essentially, this is a surrender agreement, a one-sided surrender agreement, which they are now preparing to go in and enforce. And this will be explosive. I think also in the Arab countries whose people are not going to look kindly at sending their own forces into Palestine in order to devastate Palestinian resistance and Palestinian sovereignty, which has also gone up in smoke, as I believe you mentioned. It was part of the original plan and guarantees that the West Bank would not be annexed. That was actually removed, and Israel announced in Hebrew to its own population. Netanyahu addressed Israelis immediately after this press non-conference, where the press was not allowed to ask questions. That's how much democracy is being advanced here by the US empire and Israel. But he announced in Hebrew immediately after, don't worry, Palestinian sovereignty does not exist in this plan. There will never be a sovereign Palestinian state, even as the nations of the world are all stepping up. So there's really very unstable contradictions going on right now between the actions of empire and the actions of humanity and the deeply felt needs of humanity. And that's the question on the table. What kind of world are we going to have? Are we all going to be the dupes of the prevailing empire, which happens to be the United States at the moment, but that's not long in the cards. The US empire is falling apart for all kinds of reasons, but particularly economically, that our economy is dominated by a very small oligarchy. It cannot sustain itself. It is not sustaining itself. We are being overtaken, by the BRICS access, or whatever you want to call it, the aligned countries of the global South. We are not long as the dominant empire. And we watch international law being shredded here at our peril, because what's going to protect us, that is the countries of the West and the US? What exactly are we going to look to so that we are not carved up and occupied by the next dominant empire?
You talk about oligarchs, controlling America, and I'm in Lebanon at the moment, and this is what we've been dealing with for the last 30 years. A group of oligarchs who've dominated the country and brought it to ruin. But we've had a shift, thank God. 2022, when the last parliamentary elections, and we had some independent change MPs come into office, and also with the new president and prime minister. So, but it doesn't mean that those oligarchs aren't still in power and wielding strength. And we have elections next year, but it's like, we're so tiny. America is so huge. Obviously, the impact of oligarchs here is profoundly felt, but it's so much more amplified in America with, a small group who control so many powerful industries, finance to weapons to pharma to media. The media is the most important industry in the world because it, just changes your beliefs and your attitudes. But just getting back to topic, so we don't want to lose track of it. But very important issues that you just raised then, and what the future looks like. But let me just ask you, why do you think Hamas signed on to this? Why do you think they?
Well, from what I understand, Hamas only signed on to the ceasefire and the prisoner exchange, and all the rest was to be discussed. I think they began to see that prisoner exchange was not doing them any good, that the hostages cannot be used as bargaining chips the way they used to be, because it's like it's like an arms race, an arms race of hostages. So now Israel does the same hostage taking, but in far greater volume. So the hostages really don't provide them much of a bargaining chip anymore. And I think they needed a break. I think the hope is to get some trucks in. And I have not heard that the trucks are moving. I don't know if they are. I haven't seen any claims that they are moving. It'd be nice.
I've seen a little bit on social media.
Okay.
I don't know if it's in the numbers that's necessary, but
right. They should have, 500 or 600 trucks a day at a minimum. And the trucks are lined up, for miles. So that aid could be brought in. In the best of all worlds, you would have a couple days of reprieve, bring in some food aid and some shelters and get people off the streets, while uniting for peace is put on the table. And once it's put on the table, it can move very quickly. You can have a vote within, I think, 72 hours. So the work that's being done now diplomatically and in terms of public education is absolutely critical for people to know that we actually do have the power to stop genocide now. We can shut down genocide, not just boycott it, not just divest from it and wait for, knock-on effects in the coming months or years. We can stop genocide now. And for people to know that this is a tested mechanism, that we already have the votes, that we have public opinion on our side overwhelmingly, we could actually win this. The only thing between us and the end of the genocide is public knowledge and public asserting its will for civil society to lead the way. And speaking of civil society, I want to mention the role that Palestine is playing here. And it's not through the governmental Palestinian Authority, but it's through civil society. And there is a large network of some 150 non-governmental organizations that all work together through a group called PINGO. That's the Palestinian NGO Network. And they have really taken the lead here in advocating for uniting for peace and for a protection force. Even the ambassador and the Palestinian President Abbas, they have all called for a protection force. They haven't specified uniting for peace, although I believe it was Ambassador Mansour who did say that if the Security Council cannot step up, then that they would support uniting for peace. So it's very important for their governmental authority and their UN reps to also hear from us, because they are likely to move with public opinion as the actual realities of the Trump plan become absolutely undeniable.
What you're suggesting and what I'm seeing is that this should be the new slogan of every rally on Palestine all over the world. We should all unite under one banner and unite for peace. And that should be the conversation that we should all be having right now, and not be deluded into thinking that this peace plan is going to work. And I was going to ask you, what if you were successful? What if the Uniting for Peace resolution is successful? What if the US vetoes funding for peacekeepers and Israel refuses international forces in Gaza and no country enforces sanctions due to the US economic pressure that will obviously come to bear on them? Exactly what happened with previous UN actions on Palestine. What's the plan B? Is there?
Yes, well, this is integrated into Plan A, actually, because the US veto has absolutely no role in this whatsoever, because it is outside of the Security Council. It is any Uniting for Peace process, including this one, which is about the protection force.
But what if they come down with pressure on them anyway and say, like,
Oh, of course, yes, and they are. And that's where civil society has to come in. We have to be the counterweight to the bribes, to the treachery, to the threats, to the intimidation. That is going on right now, you can be sure, big time, which is why we need to be heard from. Democracy is not irrelevant to this process. Democracy is critical for any solution here, and we are the manifestation of that force of democracy. That's why we have to be heard. That's why, as you say, we have to be out there demanding this. This is why this should be the thrust. Now, one of the very exciting things, let me mention, but to your other question first, I want to mention about the unions and what's going on with the economic shutdowns.
Right, because
that's extremely exciting. And I think it's another sign of how ready the world is for this. I want to mention the unions and the other really profound social movements like La Via Campesina, which is a union of 200 million farmers and fisher people around the world. They are all about this. The global South has really been mobilized around this. So Colombia stepping up to the plate comes out of that context. There is a lot of support and momentum. But the other possible hang-up you mentioned was, what if Israel doesn't permit the forces? Well, Israel has nothing to do with this. It's only the permission of Palestine, which has already called for a protection force. So if this passes, it's really pretty unthinkable that Palestine would resist. They remain in control. This is not the usual peacekeeper thing, the way the UN works when the Security Council sends in forces. Then the countries who accept those forces, they lose their sovereignty and their economy. The peacekeepers function as an occupying force who take their orders from the Security Council. That's not true with Uniting for Peace. The home country has to has to permit and support this process throughout. The minute they decide they don't want it anymore, those forces are gone. So there is no veto by the US or effectively by Israel. And then just to mention quickly, if I could, about the unions.
Please, because I was going to talk about the grassroots movement, because inciting the unions, and we've seen the police force in Milan, we've seen so many groups around the world really stand up for Palestine, but please tell us.
Yes, and what's going on with the general strike in Italy is really remarkable. Many of the unions, but in particular this huge grassroots union, which includes the dock workers, the dock workers unions, as well as transportation workers, as well as public sector workers and healthcare workers, and then social unions as well, like for tenant unions and housing. So this is a huge union. It may in fact be the largest in Italy, but it's a grassroots union. And it's called the USB, and it has an Italian name that I would not do justice to, but it's referred to as the USB. So the USB, they have been boycotting weapons shipments in some of their ports, especially Genoa, but other ports as well. They've been boycotting for a while. They are a grassroots, socially minded, bottom-up union. They are not a top-down union, so they can't be captured by corporate money and big governments and the likes. They are a real working people's union, and they have a very clear agenda for international justice and human rights. And they've long taken, shown support for Palestinian rights. But now they are shutting down the ports, shutting down the whole economy. They brought 1 million people out in the streets last week, and then the week before they did it again. So on 2 occasions, just in the last 2 weeks, they have had general strikes, which have completely shut down the economy. And they are networking with other unions around the Mediterranean as well. So we're going to see this grow. And they are not fooled for a minute by this surrender proposal from Donald Trump. I mean, to them, it's laughable, like it is to people who are informed about what it's actually about, which is essentially Donald Trump's financial interests at the end of the day. So they're not fooled for a minute. They're extremely active here. And that is just one of many major social movements that have now specifically come out. Their demand is not only to end the genocide, their demand was to protect the flotilla. Yes. And now their demand is to pass Colombia's proposal to unite for peace and send a protection force to Gaza.
That would be amazing, honestly. So aligned with, I guess you're also closely aligned with the BDS movement, all of those groups, the International Solidarity Movement, all of them on board with the Uniting for Peace?
Some are more active than others. Some have decided, for now at least, to remain focused on their sector. Right. But they are friendly to Uniting for Peace. It requires a real mind shift because we have this kind of propagandized mantra in our minds that we are irrelevant from the process, that all we can do is protest, all we can do is resist, as opposed to demanding a really fundamental and transformative solution. To my mind, it keeps going back to that Alice Walker saying that the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. So many people, especially—
They find it aggressive. Is it too
What's that?
Do they find it too aggressive?
Or they just don't believe their own power. They don't believe our power to create a transformative agenda here, to actually challenge empire, which is what this amounts to. And it's not going to be a simple road forward, which is why their strategies are really important as well. We have to keep the pressure on for boycott and sanction and divestment and all that. That's really critical. But we have an opportunity right now to shut this down in real time, like within a week or two. And there are already countries who have stepped forward to say that they would put tens of thousands of troops into this, who would be there as, as a force for peace, not a force for war. Israel could drop a nuke if they want. I mean, they would self-destruct, but I wouldn't put it past them, to self-destruct in order to block Palestinian rights. They are indeed, a terrible terrorist state. And, who can say what they will do? But the precedent is there. Global public opinion is there. There is no way out for Israel. Israel is really unraveling, in its own armed forces now. They have a huge problem with PTSD, with no-shows, with resistance, suicides. This is not working for Israel. It's not working for Israel's economy, which is only being propped up, by what was it, 30-some billion dollars over these past 2 years in weapons and other assistance. They have free healthcare. Well, we don't have healthcare at all. Some 100 million Americans are struggling with healthcare debt, and huge numbers of Americans don't. Effectively, even if you have health insurance, you can't afford to use it. So here we are,
Shut down, by the way.
What's that?
Is the government still in shutdown at the moment?
It is indeed, yes, right. It's incredible. We do not have a functioning government whatsoever, and
Gives Trump more opportunity to do whatever he wants, I guess. Your leader's a dictator.
Oh yeah, it is. I mean, our democracy is quite on its last
This is where I want to
legs.
get into now before we've got maybe 20 minutes or so, but I hope you can stay on because I really want to get into a few questions on Trump, America, democracy. So Trump's second term has seen escalating authoritarian measures, mass deportations, attacks on press freedom, threats against political opponents, economic coercion of allies. What we're seeing is Trump governing in an increasingly authoritarian manner and using those threats against allies who disagree with him, attacking, as I said, the free press, pursuing what critics call retaliatory prosecutions. And at the same time, he's given Netanyahu carte blanche in Gaza, presenting himself as a peacemaker. How does Trump's authoritarian consolidation of power affect your ability to build the Palestine solidarity movement in the US? And are you seeing increased repression of pro-Palestine activism? And how does your coalition operate in this, more hostile domestic environment?
So first, I just want to stress that this is not new. I have a lawsuit against myself for my participating in a student protest and demand for divestment at the Washington University in St. Louis. And that was undertaken by Democrats. And, the war on the BDS movement, the making of BDS illegal, the, this prevailing opinion that resisting Israel or criticizing Israel as anti-Semitic, that came to full fruition under Democrats as well. So yes, Trump has taken it to new and terrifying extremes, but it's not like this is Trump. This is a bipartisan thing. And likewise, the deportations, it's still Barack Obama who holds the record even now, although Trump is trying to compete with that record. At the same time, his standing and his policies are crashing and burning in public opinion. And we see that now for the first time in the US, where more people support Palestinians than support Israel. You also see this with his immigration policies. Now that people see what they're actually about, support for immigrants is now running 80%, which is huge. And so he is self-destructing, and his authoritarianism is a real, it's a real symptom of his insecurity. His need to shut down the press and shut down communications is very much, to defend his own falling stature. And I haven't seen his latest numbers, but, early on, he ranked the lowest of any president on record at their first 100 days. So he may say, oh, I'm doing great, but he means for him, he's doing terrible. The problem is that so many voters have been discouraged from voting. So we actually have about somewhere around 30%. Actually, it's more than that. I think it's more like close to 40% of American voters who don't come out. So that is the issue, is that Americans have lost faith in our electoral system and our political system, which is why, both parties go to great lengths to try to blame political opposition. That is opposition that actually offers people what they want, that is taxing the rich and providing health care as a human right and quality schools and, and the right to a job and wages that will actually keep families out of poverty. These have enormous public support, but neither party will support them, especially when they get into power. So, it's really important, I think, to look beyond this very concocted analysis that says we have to choose between a lesser and a greater evil. And the two parties outdo each other when they're in power as greater evils, and we saw Barack Obama, bomb 7 countries, go to war with 7 countries, after we were horrified by George Bush. They change places depending on who's in power. I think it's really important for people to stand up and to not be intimidated when it comes to how we vote, and not be intimidated when it comes to how we speak. And to tell you the truth, I'm not even keeping track of who can be coming after me for speaking the truth and speaking what Americans already believe, for speaking what international law and human rights uphold. We have a right to do this, and they may try to shut us down. They are not yet coming after activists, but they are coming after the press. They are coming after green card holders. If you are a U.S. citizen, they are not specifically coming after you, although they singled me out in that protest. They singled me out to charge me with assault after having been assaulted by police, wielding bicycles. I was charged with assault, but the charges are so laughable, I have stopped worrying about them. There's footage. This is all over the place. And I'm accused of kicking the cop who assaulted me from behind, but he was assaulting me from the front. It's laughable. It's completely laughable. It reflects their absolute desperation. I take it as a badge of honor to be considered that much trouble, that they are going to these ridiculous lengths to try to intimidate us, is basically what they're trying to do. They're trying to intimidate us. I don't think it's going to last. There's a lot of confusion in the courts now, but some of them are standing up and putting restraining orders on Trump as he tries to send Texas troops into Illinois or Michigan or whatever the latest has been. The U.S. is a mess, and people don't need to be convinced of that. And here we are, giving $30 billion to Israel in order to murder children by the tens of thousands, while we can't even provide food assistance for starving children here in this country. This country has made itself, the butt of international jokes. We've made ourselves, a laughing matter. And I think, when we want to talk about making America great, Trump is doing exactly the opposite of that. And he's running an Israel first country. And the American people don't buy this whatsoever. It's reflected in our polls. And I think there's enormous power, again, to Alice Walker's wisdom. The biggest way we give up power is by believing their propaganda, attempting to talk us out of our power. So just, reject their propaganda and the powerlessness and the hopelessness that it's trying to mire you in, and, stand up for the power that we have. And, I encourage you to go to Lifeline for Palestine. Let's shut down this genocide as a first order of business. But there's so much more that we can do. We can provide health care for everyone at far less cost than what we are paying for right now. We can tax the rich. We can restore the Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid and all that, which is under attack. And, we can have a world that works for all of us. If it doesn't work for all of us, it's not going to work for any of us. And
Mm.
especially when the shots are being called by you know, by the 1/10 of 1%. That's who's basically raking in the dough right now and buying out government. The Americans are sick of it.
Yeah, I see that with everything we are witnessing on, on social media with the actions around the country in America. So looking at, your comments about the lesser of two evils and reading your political viewpoints on that, I guess asking this question is probably redundant, but is there any realistic prospect of shifting either of the major parties' position, or does this prove your long-standing argument that America needs to build an independent political power outside the two-party system?
After you've been watching American politics for as long as I have, and I grew up in the 1950s, and I saw the realignment movement. This came out in the 60s, and the 70s. The realignment movement, which was going to harness the power of the civil rights movement, which was quite transformative, and the labor movement, which was strong back in the day. It was going to bring them together. But then there was the war in Vietnam, which then came down with an iron fist that you could not criticize the Democratic Party. You couldn't criticize the war. It split up that coalition. And I've seen that happen every time there's a shiny new object here that we're all supposed to get excited. Barack Obama's hope and change. The power that empire has to control these movements. If they're growing up out of that power system, they're not going to reform that system. We've just seen this too many times to give it even the time of day now that these reform movements are going to work. There are special conditions in New York that enabled the rise of Mandami. I hope he wins, but I don't think he's going to solve this crisis. We've seen this before. And we've seen how individuals, or AOC, who really, I think, threw in the towel on her integrity in her effort to court power within the Democratic Party.
Mm. Yes,
The squad,
disappointing.
same
See, I
thing.
guess, yeah.
Well, disappointing if you drank the Kool-Aid. For those who didn't drink the Kool-Aid, it's just more proof of principle. And we see this over and over again. And at the same time, we're seeing transformative social movements begin to take hold around the world
Mm.
in a way that really begins to add up.
Mm.
And there is
How
now
did they get money? How do they get the funding to lift them up because that's the difference between getting 70 million votes or getting 2 million votes. It's the funding, the prominence, the media coverage. I mean, that's how, you will get known, you or others in that third category. Yeah.
It's not easy, but if you are within that system, what do you get? You get more of the same. So in my mind, that system kind of rules itself out. And politics, it's juggling what you have at the moment, and you're climbing the rock face and you got to figure out, okay, now where do I put this arm, and where do I move that leg? You can't predict in advance, except, so you could look to, for example, Jesse Ventura, who won the governor's race in Minnesota. This was back in, was it the 80s? He won without a funded campaign, basically. He won because he was able to sneak into the debates before the debates were completely controlled and shut down. And his numbers went from very low up to very high. What we're looking right now is a collapse of power. So we're going to see conditions that we cannot predict. And that may include, for example, openings in the media or the ability of alternative media to prevail, given we're in crisis now in every dimension of our lives, and we may see a whole series of other crises that create openings for communications. In my view, the goal here is not to know where exactly that opening is happening, but to be prepared for it, to be prepared by doing the work, by having the policy solutions at hand, by keeping tabs on where the American public um, is and what the American people are hurting for, and to offer that consistently and to be prepared for the opening to happen, because the old order is falling and there is an uprising, which is, it can be hard to see because it's not, the revolution will not be televised, but that doesn't mean it isn't happening. It very much is. I think local races are really important. As Greens, we also run at higher levels so that we can put an agenda out there where it can actually be heard nationally. And it's important not to sit by and allow genocide to go unchallenged, in my view, and militarism and the usurping of our tax dollars for purely destructive ends. It's really important to put solutions on the table and then to have people running at the local level where you begin to build power. And we have some great candidates that are currently running. Shout out, for example, to my running mate, Professor Butch Ware, who's now running for governor of California in a race that actually could be a toss-up. And because they have a top two system, he actually has a potential to break through in that top two system. And I'd urge people to go to Butch Ware for governor, for an electoral fight. And I think we have to fight on all grounds. We have to fight on the solutions, and we also have to continue to challenge power, especially locally, where it's easier to break through.
I've just got a couple more questions, and particularly about the midterms. The 2026 midterms are roughly 18 months away. And I believe all 435 House seats and about 33 Senate seats will be contested. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm doing my research online. Is there any realistic prospect that these elections could shift the composition and control of Congress in a way that would actually change US policy on Israel? And could we see enough progressives elected who would vote to cut military aid, or has pro-Israel lobby, the AIPAC lobby and others, thoroughly captured both parties?
I think we're seeing things shift right now. So it's too soon to say, but I think we cannot rule that out. We cannot rule out a real change in US policy towards Israel. That could happen because American public opinion has profoundly changed. And you now have some centrist Democrats who are announcing completely out of the blue that they are not going to accept AIPAC funding.
Wow.
AIPAC's conferences now are embarrassingly
Really?
slim. Yeah, they are having a
That's
huge
big
fall in
news.
stature. Oh yeah, so things are shifting, not fast enough, but they definitely are shifting, and I think we are likely to see some consequences in the upcoming vote. And voting demographics have profoundly changed. So, younger voters especially abhor the genocide at the same time that we're being incriminated, for talking about it. We're in this very dynamic equilibrium right now, which makes it more important than ever for us to stand up for what's right and what our future depends on, for what human rights depends on, and international law and foreign policy. We need to do right in foreign policy in order to do right for ourselves. I think we are seeing American empire really crash and burn right now with the rise of these right-wing countries around the world, which is really very much a consequence of neoliberalism and the disaster that's been created economically, climate-wise. Energy prices in Germany, for example, have absolutely skyrocketed, and we are demanding that they purchase U.S. Natural gas at 4 times the cost of what they used to get it from Russia for. The U.S. has overseen the dismantling of the nuclear weapons treaties. We have led that, creating this very terrifying and unstable global situation right now. We're in a completely unsustainable, unjust and untenable moment. So things are going to change. There is a rising force for democracy and justice and for ending genocide and militarism and putting those dollars into actual human needs. There is a global movement. There is a local and national movement. And we have to decide, do we want a world that we can live in? Do we want a world at all? It really comes down, those are the same questions here. That's what we're deciding right now. Are we going to align our politics with the power holders? Or are we going to start demanding a politics that speaks to humanity and the future that we deserve? That's the choice that's on the table, and it becomes more stark all the time, which is very motivating for people, I think, to stand up and to recognize that we actually do have the power. The number of people who are not voting now is more than enough to win as an alternative force. So it's really important, that we're approximately evenly divided, non-voters, Democrats, Republicans. And those numbers are shifting, especially among younger people. So if we can actually educate people that we do have the power, we not only have the power, we actually have real solutions for healthcare, for social housing, for rent control, for taxing the rich, for restoring Social Security and public schools and quality paying jobs, and to stop AI from taking over our economy and our jobs and our livelihoods. These are solvable problems if we have a democracy. And that's fundamentally the question. Who's going to run the show? Is it going to be the oligarchs, the 1%, or is it going to be, the mass of humanity that's really calling for human rights and a sustainable, just future? That's in our hands.
Yeah, rather than Larry Ellison, Elon Musk, and Mark Zuckerberg, along with Donald Trump. I mean, that's what it's looking at right now.
Chris Hedges, I should just mention, he tells the story. He was a war correspondent, and
Yeah.
he was in, he tells the story how he was in, I believe it was East Germany, before the wall came down. And there was a movement there that had begun having weekly demonstrations. And the prevailing wisdom was that maybe in some years we will prevail against the oppressive, heavy-handed, autocratic government in East Germany. And suddenly, out of nowhere, the demonstrations grew huge, such that they were putting flowers into the rifles of the of the army, and the government left town. They just got out of Dodge because it was so clear that people weren't going to take it anymore. And it came out of nowhere. And as I think, was it Mandela who said, it's always impossible until it was inevitable. And you don't know when that happens, but so much of what you find now when you look into this stuff deeply is really encouraging and reassuring that power has become unstoppable, that this union of social movements that's happening to stop the genocide now, which has been brought together really by the leadership of the Palestinian civil society and Pingo, and the social movements of Latin America, the ALBA movement, the Hague group now, which has come together to resist this, the Via Campesina, the unions in Italy and beyond who are shutting down the ports. It's not hard to envision how we shut down the genocide and thereby begin to turn the tables on empire, not only empire abroad, but also empire at home. We have the power to do this. It's just a question of having the courage of our convictions to stand up and to act on it. If we all do that, we're unstoppable together.
It's like I didn't go to the question on him, but the former Dutch defense minister Yuri Herwev, I can't pronounce his name, but said we can stop the murder of 2 million people if we dare. And that's what you're saying. We have to dare right now to believe in our own power and continue to follow truth and justice.
And it's a matter of both knowing our own power and our own vulnerability to what it is that we're creating. This monster that we're creating, that we're enabling, is coming for us too. And as people begin to realize that, it's very motivating, because you realize we have no alternative except to stand up and to fight for our future. This future belongs to all of us. It either works for all of us or none of us, and the time is now.
Yeah. Look, I really want to thank you. That was a fantastic interview. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to get out, but you've covered everything that I wanted to cover today. And I think everyone will really benefit from listening to you. And we are going to push Uniting for Peace. And I'm going to speak to groups that I know of. And really, I think this grassroots movement that you're talking about, working with unions, is the best way to really create this continue the unstoppable action. And
Yes.
I hope President Petro hears it, feels it, sees it, and does it.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much, Daizy. You summarized it all beautifully, and it's really great to hear. It's great to hear the whole thing put together the way you're putting it together. So I'm really grateful that you're out there covering this and, lifting up our media so that there are voices out there in the wilderness that are telling it like it is. So thank you so very much for all of this.
Our pleasure, and stay in touch. I mean, I won't get to see you. I'm going to be in the States, but I think our dates won't fall in line. But I am very excited to continue to see what you do, and
Great.
will be a great supporter of this Uniting for Peace. So
Wonderful.
yeah, keep me posted if there's anything else, although I'll be watching online, definitely. And all the best. Congratulations with everything that you're doing, and Godspeed. We're here with you and for you.
All right, wonderful. I look forward to being in touch. Thank you so much, Daizy.
Thank you, Jill.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Real Talk and experiencing firsthand the real stories told by real people. I hope you found value and meaning, and encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Your ongoing financial support is vital to our ability to continue delivering these stories, so please remember to click on the donate button in the description, giving only what you can afford. I spent my whole life giving my time, money and skill to serve human rights and social justice causes, and I know it's not easy to keep giving selflessly. But this work is important because the mainstream media has failed to live up to their obligations. So we need to step up, speak up, or we're no better than them. I believe by tuning in to this podcast, you are someone who wants to know the facts and the truth, so you can independently decide what to believe and what not to. My job is to deliver that information. Yours is to place a value on it. Whatever you decide is humbly welcome. Thanks again, and see you on the next episode of Real Talk.